Chapter 1. The Last Air. The evening air was heavy with the scent of decay as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the ancient estate into deep shadow. The mansion, once a grand symbol of wealth and power, now stood as a monument to the forgotten. Ivy crawled along its weathered stone walls, its roots digging deep into the cracks, as if trying to pull the structure back into the earth from which it had risen. The windows, dark and hollow, stared out like the vacant eyes of a corpse, betraying no sign of life within. The grounds surrounding the mansion were vast and overgrown, a tangled mass of dead leaves and twisted branches that clawed at the air. An oppressive silence hung over the estate, broken only by the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. The path leading to the entrance was lined with statues, each one depicting a figure from a long-forgotten era. Time had not been kind to these stone sentinels. Their features were eroded, their expressions lost to the ages, leaving behind only hollow, eyeless faces. At the center of this decay stood the mansion's front door, a massive wooden barrier, swollen and cracked with age. The door bore the weight of centuries, and its iron knocker, shaped like a snarling beast, was cold to the touch. It had been years, perhaps decades, since anyone had approached this threshold. Yet tonight it would be disturbed. A figure emerged from the gloom, moving with deliberate purpose toward the mansion. Dressed in a long, dark coat that brushed the ground, the figure's face was obscured by the brim of a wide hat. In one gloved hand, the figure clutched a piece of parchment, its edges yellowed and frayed. The parchment bore a seal, a family crest that had once commanded respect and fear, now little more than a relic of a bygone era. With a steady hand, the figure reached for the iron knocker. The cold metal sent a shiver through the figure's arm as it was lifted and brought down with a heavy thud against the door. The sound echoed through the still air, a dull, hollow noise that seemed to reverberate through the very bones of the mansion. The figure waited, unmoving, as the silence returned, deeper and more suffocating than before. After what felt like an eternity, the door creaked open, revealing a darkened hallway beyond. The figure stepped across the threshold, and the door groaned as it swung shut behind them, sealing out the last traces of daylight. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of damp wood and rotting fabric. The walls were lined with portraits, each one depicting a member of the ancient family that had once ruled this estate. Their eyes seemed to follow the figure as they moved deeper into the mansion, the weight of their gazes a palpable force in the dim light. The hallway led to a grand staircase, its once polished banister now covered in a layer of dust so thick it dulled the wood's shine. The figure ascended the stairs, their steps muffled by a threadbare carpet that had long since lost its color. At the top of the stairs, the hallway branched off in several directions, each leading into deeper shadows. The figure paused, as if listening to the whispers of the past that lingered in the air, before choosing a path and continuing onward. The chosen corridor was long and narrow, lined with doors on either side. Most were closed, their brass handles tarnished with age, but one door stood slightly ajar, a thin sliver of light seeping through the gap. The figure approached cautiously, their gloved hand reaching out to push the door open. The hinges protested with a sharp creak, revealing a small, dimly lit room beyond. Inside, the room was dominated by a large, ornate bed, its once rich canopy now tattered and moth-eaten. The figure stepped closer, their eyes drawn to the object that lay upon the bed. It was a book, bound in cracked leather, its pages yellowed with age. The family crest was embossed on the cover, the same crest that had sealed the parchment still clutched in the figure's hand. The figure placed the parchment beside the book, the two relics of a forgotten lineage reunited at last. With a slow, deliberate motion. The figure opened the book, its brittle pages crackling in the silence. Each page was filled with intricate writing, a chronicle of the family's history, of its rise to power and its eventual fall. The figure read in silence, the weight of the words pressing down like a physical burden. As the last light of day faded from the sky outside, the figure reached the final page. There, written in a trembling hand, was a single name, the last heir of the family, the final link in a chain that had been broken for centuries. The figure's hand hovered over the page, as if hesitating to acknowledge the truth that had been hidden for so long. With a sudden, decisive motion, the figure closed the book, the sound echoing through the empty room. The name was sealed away once more, locked in the pages of history where it belonged. The figure rose from the bed, leaving the book and the parchment behind, and turned to leave the room. The door closed behind them with a soft click, the sliver of light vanishing as the room was plunged into darkness. The figure retraced their steps through the mansion, descending the grand staircase and crossing the threshold once more. Outside, the night had fully descended, the estate bathed in the cold light of the moon. The figure paused for a moment, their eyes scanning the darkened windows of the mansion one last time, before turning and disappearing into the shadows. The mansion stood silent once more, its secrets buried deep within its walls, waiting for the day when they would be uncovered again. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the faintest hint of a name that would be forgotten once more as the last heir vanished into the night. Chapter 2. Crypt of Forgotten Souls. The night was deep and still as the figure moved away from the mansion, following a narrow path that twisted through the dense woods surrounding the estate. The trees, ancient and towering, loomed overhead, their branches intertwined to form a canopy that blotted out the moonlight. The air was cold and damp, the scent of earth and decaying leaves filling the figure's senses as they pressed onward. The path, long forgotten and overgrown, was barely visible beneath the thick layer of fallen leaves. The figure's steps were cautious but purposeful, each footfall sending a faint crunch through the silence. Ahead, the trees began to thin, revealing a clearing bathed in the faint glow of the moon. At the center of the clearing stood a structure, hidden beneath a shroud of ivy and moss. It was a mausoleum, its weathered stone walls cracked and crumbling with age. The structure was small and unadorned, its entrance sealed by a heavy stone door that bore no markings or inscriptions. The mausoleum seemed out of place in the wildness of the forest, a relic of a time long past, forgotten by all except those who knew its secrets. The figure approached the mausoleum, the chill in the air growing more intense with each step. There was a sense of unease, a weight that pressed down on the figure as they stood before the sealed entrance. The stone door was covered in a thick layer of moss, its surface slick and cold to the touch. For a moment, the figure hesitated, as if sensing the darkness that lay within. But the hesitation was brief. With a firm grip, the figure began to push against the stone door. The door resisted at first, as if it had not been moved in centuries, but slowly it began to shift. The sound of grinding stone echoed through the clearing as the door inched open, revealing a yawning black void beyond. A gust of cold air rushed out, carrying with it the stench of rot and decay, a scent that clung to the figure as they stepped inside. The interior of the mausoleum was as dark as a tomb. The figure paused, allowing their eyes to adjust to the gloom before proceeding further. The floor was made of uneven stone, slick with moisture, and the walls were lined with niches, each one containing a decayed coffin or remnants of what had once been a body. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling like tattered curtains, and the air was thick with the smell of death. At the far end of the mausoleum, a stone staircase descended into the earth, its steps worn smooth by the passage of time. The figure moved toward the staircase, their footsteps echoing in a confined space. As they descended, the temperature dropped further, the chill seeping into the figure's bones. The darkness grew thicker, pressing in from all sides, until the figure could no longer see the walls or the steps beneath their feet. The staircase spiraled downward, deeper and deeper into the earth, until it finally opened into a vast chamber. The figure paused at the threshold, surveying the scene before them. The chamber was enormous, its ceiling lost in the shadows above. The walls were lined with crypts, each one sealed with a heavy stone slab. The floor was littered with debris, shattered bones, crumbling stone, and tattered remnants of burial shrouds. A sense of desolation hung over the chamber, as if it had been abandoned for centuries. In the center of the chamber stood a large, ornate sarcophagus, its lid slightly askew. The figure approached it cautiously, their eyes fixed on the sarcophagus as if expecting it to move. The lid was covered in intricate carvings depicting scenes of death and mourning, and at the foot of the sarcophagus was a name, chiseled into the stone in ancient script. The figure reached out, their gloved hand trembling slightly as they touched the edge of the lid. With a slow, deliberate motion, they began to slide the lid further open, revealing the contents within. The air grew colder, the stench of decay overwhelming as the sarcophagus was fully exposed. Inside lay the remains of a figure, long dead and mummified by the passage of time. The body was wrapped in tattered cloth, its skeletal hands crossed over its chest. Around its neck hung a heavy chain, from which dangled a pendant bearing the same crest as the book in the mansion. The pendant, though tarnished with age, still held a faint glimmer, as if it retained some vestige of the power it once symbolized. The figure stared down at the remains, their eyes drawn to the pendant. Slowly, they reached out and took hold of the chain, lifting it from the skeletal neck. As the pendant came free, the chamber seemed to shudder, as if the very earth beneath the mausoleum was reacting to the disturbance. The figure hesitated, feeling the weight of the pendant in their hand, before slipping it into the pocket of their coat. A low rumble echoed through the chamber, the sound of stone grinding against stone. The figure looked up, their eyes scanning the crypts lining the walls. The stone slabs that sealed them began to shift, as if some unseen force was pushing them open. One by one, the crypts were revealed, their ancient contents stirring in the darkness. The figure turned, their eyes fixed on the staircase leading back to the surface. But before they could move, the chamber was filled with a cacophony of noise. The sound of bones rattling, of stones falling, and of something else, something that sent a chill down the figure's spine. It was a whisper, faint and indistinct, yet filled with malice and anger. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as the crypts gave up their dead. The figure moved quickly, their footsteps echoing in the chamber as they raced toward the staircase. Behind them, the crypts erupted, the ancient dead rising from their long-forgotten graves. Skeletal hands clawed at the air, bony limbs creaked with unnatural movement, and the whispers grew into a maddening chorus. The figure didn't look back, their focus solely on the staircase that promised escape. The climb was arduous, each step feeling heavier than the last as the figure ascended. The whispers followed, relentless, seeping into the figure's mind, filling it with thoughts of dread and despair. The cold intensified, the air growing thin and stifling, but the figure pressed on, driven by a fear that was deeper than the grave itself. At last, the figure emerged into the mausoleum, their body trembling with exhaustion and fear. The stone door stood ajar, the night air beckoning just beyond. With the last of their strength, the figure pushed through the door, stumbling out into the clearing. The night was still and silent once more, the moonlight casting long shadows across the ground. The mausoleum stood unchanged, its secrets sealed away once more. But the figure knew that something had been unleashed. The pendant in their pocket felt heavier, as if it carried with it the weight of all the souls trapped within the crypt. The figure turned back to the forest, their mind reeling from the ordeal, and began the long walk back to the mansion. As the figure disappeared into the trees, the clearing fell silent once more. The mausoleum stood as it had for centuries, a silent sentinel over the dead, its presence a reminder of the darkness that lingered just beneath the surface of the earth. And within its depths, the whispers continued, echoing through the chamber, calling out to the last heir who had dared to disturb the forgotten souls. Chapter 3: The Echoing Bells. The mansion loomed ahead, a shadowy silhouette against the night sky as the figure emerged from the forest. The journey back had been a silent one, with only the sound of the wind rustling through the trees and the faint crunch of leaves underfoot to accompany the figure's thoughts. The pendant, still nestled in the pocket of the figure's coat, seemed to pulse with a subtle energy, as if it had absorbed the dread and despair that lingered in the crypt below. As the figure approached the mansion, the weight of the pendant grew more pronounced, a tangible reminder of the horrors encountered in the mausoleum. The mansion's windows, dark and unyielding, gave no indication of the turmoil that had begun to unfold. Yet, the figure could sense that something had changed. An invisible thread now connected the ancient structure to the depths of the earth, pulling at the figure's consciousness with an unsettling force. The entrance door, massive and imposing, groaned as it swung open, welcoming the figure back into the cold embrace of the mansion. The air inside was heavy, thick with the scent of dust and decay. The figure paused, allowing their eyes to adjust to the dim light that filtered in from the moon outside. The hallway stretched out before them, a seemingly endless corridor lined with portraits of the mansion's long-deceased inhabitants. As the figure made their way down the hallway, the floorboards creaked underfoot, their protestations echoing through the otherwise silent house. The eyes of the portraits seemed to follow the figure's every move, their expressions frozen in time, a gallery of forgotten souls who had once called this place home. The figure felt the weight of their gazes, a constant reminder that they were never truly alone within these walls. At the far end of the hallway, the grand staircase awaited, its steps leading up into the darkness of the mansion's upper floors. The figure hesitated at the base of the stairs, glancing up at the shadowy landing above. The pendant seemed to grow heavier still, its presence pulling at the figure's resolve. But there was no other path forward. Whatever lay in wait above, the figure knew they had no choice but to face it. The climb was slow and deliberate, each step taken with care as the figure ascended the staircase. The darkness seemed to close in around them, the shadows thickening as they reached the top. The air grew colder, a chill that seeped into the figure's bones, as if the very walls of the mansion were pressing down upon them. Yet, the figure continued, driven by a need to uncover the truth behind the ancient family's legacy. At the top of the stairs, the hallway branched off in several directions, each path leading deeper into the heart of the mansion. The figure stood at the crossroads, their eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. There was none, only the oppressive silence that seemed to weigh down on everything within these walls. The figure chose the central path, the one that led toward the mansion's bell tower. The corridor was narrow, lined with doors that had long since been sealed shut. The figure's footsteps echoed in the confined space, a steady rhythm that matched the beating of their heart. The air was thick with dust, each breath heavy and labored as the figure pressed on. The walls seemed to close in, the corridor growing narrower and narrower, until it finally opened into a small, circular chamber. At the center of the chamber stood a spiral staircase, its iron steps winding upward into the darkness. The staircase was old, its surface rusted and worn, yet it remained sturdy, a pathway leading to the bell tower above. The figure placed a hand on the cold metal railing, feeling the chill seep into their skin, and began the ascent. The climb was steep and treacherous, the iron steps groaning under the figure's weight. The darkness grew more intense with each turn, until the figure was completely enveloped, unable to see anything beyond the next step. The air grew thinner, the cold more biting, as the figure ascended higher and higher, the sense of dread deepening with every step. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the figure reached the top of the staircase. The narrow passageway opened into a large, circular room, the walls lined with windows that had long since been boarded up. The room was empty, save for the massive bell that hung from the ceiling, its surface covered in a thick layer of dust and grime. The bell was ancient, its surface etched with symbols and markings that had faded with time. The figure stepped into the room, their eyes drawn to the bell's ominous presence. The air was thick with tension, a palpable sense of anticipation that seemed to emanate from the very walls. The figure moved closer to the bell, their footsteps muffled by the dust-covered floor. The pendant in their pocket pulsed once more, its weight now almost unbearable. Without warning, the bell began to move. Slowly at first, a faint tremor that sent a shiver down the figure's spine. The tremor grew into a steady vibration, the sound of grinding metal filling the room as the bell began to sway. The figure stood frozen, unable to tear their eyes away from the massive structure as it moved with a life of its own. The bell's movement grew more pronounced, its swaying more forceful as the vibrations intensified. The sound became a low hum, reverberating through the room, vibrating in the figure's chest. Dust and debris fell from the ceiling as the bell continued its ominous dance, the air thick with the scent of rust and decay. And then, with a deafening roar, the bell rang. The sound was unlike anything the figure had ever heard, a deep, resonant toll that shook the very foundation of the mansion. The force of the sound was overwhelming, a physical presence that pushed the figure back, causing them to stumble. The bell rang again and again, each toll growing louder, more insistent, as if it were calling out to something deep within the earth. The figure turned and made their way back to the spiral staircase, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The climb down was even more treacherous, each step feeling heavier as the weight of the pendant pressed down on the figure's mind. The bell tower, once a place of sanctuary, was now a prison, its walls closing in around the figure as they descended. At last, the figure reached the bottom of the staircase, stepping out into the circular chamber once more. The air was still thick with tension, the walls seeming to close in as the figure moved quickly down the narrow corridor. The mansion's silence was oppressive, a constant reminder of the darkness that had been unleashed. The grand staircase awaited, its steps leading down into the shadowy depths of the mansion. The figure descended slowly, their eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. The portraits on the wall seemed to watch with renewed interest, their eyes gleaming in the dim light as the figure passed by. At the bottom of the stairs, the entrance door stood ajar, the night air beckoning just beyond. The figure hesitated for a moment, their gaze lingering on the door before they turned and made their way toward it. The pendant in their pocket pulsed once more, a faint reminder of the power it held. The figure stepped out into the night, the cold air washing over them like a balm. The mansion loomed behind them, its dark windows staring out into the night like hollow eyes. The figure glanced back, their mind heavy with the knowledge of what had been awakened within the mansion's walls. The night was still, the wind whispering through the trees as the figure made their way down the path that led away from the mansion. The pendant in their pocket seemed to grow heavier with each step, a constant reminder of the darkness that now lingered in the shadows. The figure knew that the bell's toll had not gone unanswered, that something ancient and malevolent had been awakened, and it would not rest until it had claimed what was rightfully its own. As the figure disappeared into the forest, the mansion stood silent and imposing, a monument to the darkness that lay within. The bell tower, now silent, loomed above, a sentinel over the secrets buried deep within the earth. And in the stillness of the night, the echoes of the bell's toll lingered, a reminder that the darkness had only just begun to stir. Chapter 4. The Whispers in the Woods. The forest was an endless maze of towering trees and tangled undergrowth, where the darkness clung like a second skin. The figure moved silently through the shadows, their steps careful and measured as they navigated the narrow path that wound deeper into the heart of the woods. The night was eerily quiet, the usual sounds of nocturnal creatures replaced by an oppressive silence that seemed to amplify every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig underfoot. The path was narrow, barely more than a trail carved out by the passage of time and the occasional wanderer. The trees pressed in on all sides, their gnarled branches intertwining above to form a canopy that blotted out the sky. The figure's breath came in slow, measured exhales, the only sound in the oppressive stillness. The pendant, nestled in the figure's pocket, was a constant weight, its presence a reminder of the darkness that had been awakened. As the figure moved deeper into the forest, the path grew more treacherous, the ground uneven and littered with fallen branches and roots that threatened to trip up the unwary traveler. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, a musty odor that seemed to cling to the figure's clothes and skin. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the occasional glimmer of moonlight that managed to pierce the thick canopy above. The figure pressed on, their mind heavy with the events of the previous night. The bell's toll still echoed in their thoughts, a constant reminder of the ancient malevolence that had been stirred from its slumber. The forest, once a place of refuge, now felt like a living entity, its very essence infused with the same dark energy that permeated the mansion. After what felt like hours of walking, the figure reached a small clearing in the woods. The trees parted to reveal a circle of ancient stones, their surfaces covered in moss and lichen, as if they had stood there for centuries, untouched by time. The stones were arranged in a rough circle, their weathered forms casting long shadows in the dim light of the moon. The figure hesitated at the edge of the clearing, their eyes scanning the ancient site with a mix of caution and curiosity. The clearing had an unnatural stillness to it, as if the very air held its breath in anticipation. The figure stepped forward, their feet sinking slightly into the soft earth as they approached the stones. The pendant in their pocket seemed to pulse with renewed energy, a faint warmth spreading through the figure's chest as they drew closer to the center of the clearing. At the heart of the stone circle, the ground was bare, the grass worn away to reveal the dark soil beneath. The figure paused, their gaze fixed on the center of the clearing, where the shadows seemed to shift and swirl as if alive. The air was thick with tension, a palpable sense of unease that prickled the back of the figure's neck. The figure knelt at the edge of the clearing, their hand reaching into their pocket to retrieve the pendant. The small, intricate object seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight, its surface etched with symbols that had long since faded. The pendant was cold to the touch, its surface smooth and polished, yet it radiated a subtle warmth that seeped into the figure's skin. As the figure held the pendant aloft, the shadows in the clearing began to move, coalescing into a dark, swirling mass at the center of the stone circle. The figure's breath caught in their throat as they watched the shadows take form, their movements slow and deliberate, like a predator stalking its prey. The darkness seemed to pulse with life, a living, breathing entity that fed on the fear and uncertainty that lingered in the air. The figure remained still, their heart pounding in their chest as the shadowy mass continued to grow. The air grew colder, a chill that seeped into the figure's bones, as if the very ground beneath them was leeching away their warmth. The shadows writhed and twisted, their movements fluid and chaotic, as if they were struggling to break free from some unseen force. Without warning, the shadows surged forward, a wave of darkness that swept through the clearing, engulfing the stones and the figure in an instant. The figure's vision went black, the world around them dissolving into a void of impenetrable darkness. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay, a stench that clung to the figure's nostrils and filled their lungs. In the depths of the darkness, the figure could feel something moving, something ancient and malevolent, a presence that had been awakened by the tolling of the bell. The figure's pulse quickened, their senses on high alert as they tried to make sense of the swirling void around them. The darkness was alive, a seething mass of energy that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat, each beat growing louder and more insistent. The figure's hand tightened around the pendant, its cold surface a lifeline in the oppressive void. The shadows pressed in on all sides, their movements erratic and unpredictable, as if they were testing the figure's resolve. The darkness was suffocating, a tangible weight that bore down on the figure's chest, making it difficult to breathe. Suddenly, the shadows parted, revealing a small, glowing figure at the center of the clearing. The figure was barely more than a wisp of light, its form flickering and shifting like a flame caught in a breeze. The light was faint, almost ethereal, yet it radiated a warmth that seemed to cut through the cold darkness. The glowing figure moved slowly, drifting toward the center of the clearing with a grace that seemed almost unnatural. The shadows recoiled from the light, retreating to the edges of the clearing as if in fear of the small, fragile form. The figure watched in silence as the glowing light approached the center of the stone circle, its movements deliberate and purposeful. As the light reached the center of the clearing, the ground beneath it began to tremble, a low rumble that reverberated through the earth. The shadows twisted and writhed, their movements growing more frantic as the light intensified, filling the clearing with a soft, golden glow. The warmth of the light spread through the air, pushing back the cold and banishing the shadows to the edges of the forest. The ground trembled more violently, the earth splitting open to reveal a deep, gaping chasm at the center of the clearing. The light hovered above the chasm, its glow intensifying until it was almost blinding. The figure shielded their eyes, the pendant in their hand growing warmer as the light reached its peak. And then, with a sudden burst of energy, the light plunged into the chasm, disappearing into the depths of the earth. The ground shook violently, the stones around the clearing cracking and splintering as the earth heaved and buckled. The shadows surged forward once more, their movements frenzied and chaotic as they swarmed around the edges of the chasm. The figures staggered back, their heart racing as the ground beneath them continued to tremble. The pendant in their hand pulsed with energy, a faint warmth that seemed to guide the figure's movements. The chasm yawned wider, a dark, gaping maw that threatened to swallow the entire clearing whole. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the shaking stopped. The ground grew still, the shadows retreating to the edges of the clearing. their movements slow and deliberate once more. The chasm remained, a dark, ominous presence at the center of the stone circle, its depths hidden in shadow. The figure stood at the edge of the clearing, their breath coming in ragged gasps as they tried to make sense of what had just occurred. The forest was silent once more, the oppressive stillness returning as the shadows resumed their slow, methodical dance around the edges of the clearing. The figure glanced down at the pendant in their hand, its surface cool and smooth once more. The symbols etched into its surface seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight, a subtle reminder of the power it held. The figure knew that whatever had been awakened in the forest, it was not something that could be easily banished. With one last glance at the chasm, the figure turned and made their way back toward the path that led out of the clearing. The forest seemed to close in around them as they walked, the shadows pressing in on all sides, as if reluctant to let the figure leave. The path was narrow and treacherous, the ground uneven and littered with debris. But the figure pressed on, their mind heavy with the knowledge of the darkness that now lingered in the depths of the earth. As the figure disappeared into the shadows of the forest, the clearing remained still, the stones standing as silent sentinels around the dark chasm. The shadows moved slowly, their movements almost reverent as they circled the ancient site. And in the silence of the night, the whispers of the forest began to rise once more, a faint, eerie melody that carried on the wind, a reminder that the darkness had only just begun to awaken. Chapter 5. The Watcher in the Walls. The mansion loomed against the night sky, its towering silhouette outlined by the faint light of a waning moon. The once grand estate had fallen into disrepair, its stone walls cracked and crumbling, the windows dark and lifeless. The ivy that clung to the walls seemed to pulse with a life of its own, the tendrils twisting and curling as they slowly choked the structure. The wind howled through the empty corridors, a mournful sound that echoed off the walls and through the long-abandoned rooms. Inside, the mansion was a maze of shadowy hallways and dust-filled chambers. The air was thick with the scent of decay, a musty odor that seemed to cling to every surface. The wooden floors creaked underfoot, the boards warped and splintered from years of neglect. Cobwebs draped the corners of the rooms, their silken threads shimmering faintly in the pale light that filtered through the broken windows. The figure moved silently through the halls, their steps careful and deliberate as they navigated the labyrinthine interior. The pendant in their hand was a constant presence, its surface cool and smooth against their palm. The air grew colder the deeper they ventured into the mansion, a chill that seeped into their bones and raised the hairs on the back of their neck. The mansion was a place of secrets, its walls whispering of the horrors that had been buried within them. The figure could feel the weight of those secrets pressing down on them, an oppressive force that made it difficult to breathe. The shadows seemed to watch them as they moved, their dark forms shifting and twisting in the corners of the rooms, as if they were alive. The figure passed through room after room, each one more decrepit than the last. The once ornate furniture was covered in a thick layer of dust, the upholstery faded and torn. Paintings hung crooked on the walls, their frames cracked and broken, the images within them faded and distorted. The fireplaces were cold and empty, their hearths choked with ash and debris. As they moved deeper into the mansion, the figure became aware of a presence that seemed to linger just out of sight. It was an unsettling feeling, a sense of being watched by unseen eyes. The sensation grew stronger with each step, a prickling on the back of the figure's neck that made them glance over their shoulder at every turn. But there was nothing there, only the empty rooms and the ever-present shadows. The figure reached the end of a long hallway, where a set of double doors stood partially ajar. The wood was dark and weathered, the brass handles tarnished and dull. The figure hesitated for a moment, their hand hovering over the pendant as they steeled themselves to enter the room beyond. The air was thick with anticipation, as if the mansion itself was holding its breath, waiting for them to take the next step. Pushing the doors open, the figure stepped into what had once been a grand ballroom. The ceiling soared high above, the plasterwork crumbling and cracked, with patches of mold spreading across its surface like a disease. The floor was covered in shattered glass and broken tiles, remnants of what had once been a magnificent mosaic. Chandeliers, long since extinguished, hung from the ceiling, their crystal pendants swaying gently in the draft that swept through the room. At the far end of the ballroom stood a grand staircase, its banister covered in dust and cobwebs. The steps were worn and uneven, the wood creaking ominously under the figure's weight as they began to ascend. The air grew colder with each step, the chill almost unbearable by the time they reached the landing. The upper floor was a warren of narrow corridors and small, cramped rooms. The figure moved through them with purpose, their path guided by some unseen force. The pendant in their hand seemed to grow heavier the closer they got to their destination, its warmth now replaced by a cold that seeped into their very core. At the end of one particularly narrow hallway, the figure came to a stop before a door that was different from the others. It was smaller, almost hidden in the shadows, its surface scarred and pitted with age. The handle was rusted and cold to the touch, the door itself slightly ajar, as if inviting the figure to enter. The figure pushed the door open with a slow, deliberate motion, revealing a small, dimly lit room beyond. The air inside was stale and suffocating, as if it had been trapped there for centuries. The walls were lined with shelves, each one cluttered with objects that had long since fallen into disrepair. Dusty books with cracked spines, tarnished silverware, and faded photographs that were barely recognizable. In the center of the room stood a large, ornate mirror. Its surface was covered in a thick layer of dust, obscuring the reflection within. The frame was intricately carved, its once gilded surface now dull and tarnished. The figure approached the mirror slowly, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet that covered the floor. As they reached the mirror, the figure hesitated, their hand hovering over the pendant once more. The air around the mirror seemed to vibrate with energy, a low hum that resonated deep within the figure's chest. The pendant pulsed in response, its surface growing colder, as if reacting to the presence of the mirror. With a deep breath, the figure reached out and wiped a hand across the dusty surface of the mirror. The dust fell away in thick clouds, revealing the reflection beneath. But instead of seeing their own image staring back at them, the figure was met with a scene that made their blood run cold. The reflection in the mirror was not of the small, cluttered room they stood in, but of a different place entirely. It was a dark, foreboding chamber, its walls lined with tall, flickering candles that cast long shadows across the floor. In the center of the chamber stood a stone altar, its surface slick with something dark and glistening. And standing beside the altar was a figure shrouded in shadow, its form barely discernible in the dim light. The figure in the mirror seemed to sense that it was being watched, for it slowly turned its head toward the mirror, revealing a face that was twisted and grotesque, as if it had been molded from clay and left to rot. The eyes were dark and empty, devoid of any humanity, and yet they seemed to bore into the figure standing before the mirror, as if seeing straight into their soul. The figure in the mirror began to move, its movements slow and deliberate as it stepped away from the altar and toward the mirror. The shadows seemed to cling to it, as if reluctant to let it go. The air around the figure in the room grew colder, the pendant in their hand now almost too cold to touch. As the figure in the mirror drew closer, the reflection began to change. The walls of the chamber seemed to close in, the shadows growing darker and more oppressive. The altar disappeared, swallowed by the encroaching darkness, and the candles flickered and died one by one until only the figure in the mirror remained. The figure in the room could feel their heart pounding in their chest, the cold seeping into their very bones as they watched the reflection. The figure in the mirror was almost at the surface now, its twisted face filling the entire frame. And then, with a sudden, jarring movement, it reached out, its hand pressing against the surface of the mirror from the other side. The figure in the room stumbled back, their breath catching in their throat as they watched the mirror. The surface of the glass rippled like water, the figure in the mirror pressing harder against it, as if trying to break through. The pendant in the figure's hand pulsed with energy, a faint glow emanating from its surface, as if reacting to the presence of the figure in the mirror. And then, with a sound like shattering glass, the mirror exploded outward, shards of glass flying in all directions. The figure in the room raised their arms to shield their face, the cold air rushing past them as the room seemed to collapse in on itself. The shadows surged forward, engulfing the figure in darkness as the walls of the room buckled and cracked. The figure could feel the ground giving way beneath them, the floorboards splintering and breaking as the room was swallowed by the encroaching void. The cold was unbearable now, a numbing chill that sapped the strength from the figure's limbs and left them gasping for breath. The pendant in their hand was a lifeline, its faint glow the only source of warmth in the darkness. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the collapse stopped. The air grew still, the shadows retreating as the room slowly reformed around the figure. The walls were whole once more, the shelves lined with objects that were now pristine and untouched by time. The air was warm and inviting, the musty scent replaced by the faint aroma of burning incense. But the mirror was gone. Its ornate frame and reflective surface vanished without a trace. The figure stood in the center of the room, their breath coming in ragged gasps as they tried to make sense of what had just occurred. The pendant in their hand was cool once more, its glow faded to a faint flicker. The figure knew that the mirror had shown them something that was not meant to be seen by mortal eyes. The presence in the walls was real, and it was watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. The mansion was a place of secrets, and those secrets were not meant to be uncovered. With one last glance around the room, the figure turned and made their way back toward the door. The air in the hallway was cold once more, the oppressive chill returning as they stepped out of the room and into the shadows. The mansion seemed to close in around them as they walked, the walls pressing in as if trying to keep them from leaving. The figure moved quickly now. Their steps hurried as they made their way back through the maze of corridors and rooms. The shadows watched them as they passed, their dark forms shifting and twisting in the corners of the rooms, as if waiting for the figure to make a wrong move. The pendant in their hand was a constant presence, its cool surface a reminder of the darkness that lurked within the mansion. As the figure reached the grand staircase once more, they paused for a moment, their gaze drifting back toward the narrow hallway where the room with the mirror had been. The air was thick with tension, a palpable sense of unease that made the figure's heart race. The mansion was alive, its walls filled with secrets and horrors that had been buried for centuries. The figure knew that they had only just begun to uncover the darkness that lay hidden within the mansion's walls. The Watcher was real, and it was not something that could be easily banished. The pendant in their hand pulsed faintly, a subtle reminder of the power it held. With a final glance at the darkened hallway, the figure turned and descended the staircase, their steps echoing off the walls as they made their way back toward the entrance of the mansion. The air grew warmer the closer they got to the exit, the oppressive chill fading as the shadows receded. As they stepped out into the night, the figure paused, their gaze drifting back toward the mansion. The structure loomed against the night sky, its dark silhouette outlined by the faint light of the moon. The wind howled through the empty corridors, a mournful sound that echoed off the stone walls. The figure knew that they would have to return to the mansion, to face the darkness that lurked within its walls. The Watcher was waiting, and it would not rest until its secrets were revealed. With a deep breath, the figure turned away from the mansion and disappeared into the night, the pendant in their hand a cold reminder of the horrors that lay ahead. The mansion stood silent and still, its walls filled with the echoes of the past, the Watcher in the walls waiting for the next intruder to uncover its secrets. Chapter 6: The Descent. The sun had barely risen when the figure returned to the mansion. The morning light did little to dispel the gloom that clung to the estate, its dark windows like vacant eyes staring out at the world. The air was thick with fog, the dense mist swirling around the mansion's stone walls, giving it an ethereal, ghostly appearance. The figure stood at the entrance for a moment, the pendant in their hand cool against their palm, before pushing the heavy doors open and stepping inside. The mansion greeted them with the same oppressive silence as before. The shadows clung to the corners of the rooms, lurking just out of sight, as if waiting for the figure to make the first move. The air was heavy with the scent of decay, the musty odor of damp wood and old stone that had permeated every inch of the mansion. The figure could feel the cold seeping into their bones as they moved deeper into the house, the chill intensifying with each step. The figure's destination was clear: the cellar. They had avoided it during their previous explorations, but the events of the night before had made it clear that the mansion's secrets were not confined to the upper floors. The cellar was where the darkness was strongest, where the Watcher in the walls was most powerful. The pendant in their hands seemed to pulse with a faint light as they descended the narrow staircase that led to the depths below. The cellar was a labyrinth of narrow corridors and low, vaulted chambers. The walls were damp with moisture, the stone slick and cold to the touch. The air was thick with the smell of mold and earth, a dampness that seemed to cling to everything. The floor was uneven, the ground beneath the figure's feet shifting and unstable, as if the mansion itself was trying to swallow them whole. The figure moved slowly, their steps cautious as they navigated the dark passageways. The only light came from the pendant, its glow just enough to illuminate the path ahead. The shadows seemed to close in around them, pressing against the walls as if trying to suffocate the figure in their cold embrace. The air grew colder the deeper they went, the chill biting at their skin and making their breath come in short, shallow gasps. As they walked, the figure became aware of a sound echoing through the cellar, a low, rhythmic thumping that reverberated through the stone walls. It was faint at first, barely audible above the sound of their own footsteps, but it grew louder as they pressed on, the sound becoming more insistent, more urgent. The figure's heart began to race, a sense of dread settling in their chest as they realized the sound was coming from deep within the mansion. The corridors twisted and turned, leading the figure deeper into the bowels of the estate. The walls grew narrower, the passageways more confined, as if the mansion was closing in on them. The thumping sound grew louder with each step, a steady, relentless beat that seemed to resonate within the very walls of the cellar. The pendant in the figure's hand pulsed in time with the sound, its glow flickering as if in response to the rhythm. Finally, the figure reached a large, circular chamber at the very heart of the cellar. The walls were lined with ancient stone, the surface cracked and weathered from centuries of neglect. The floor was uneven, the stone tiles broken and shifted by the relentless pressure of the earth beneath. In the center of the chamber stood a large, iron-bound door, its surface covered in intricate carvings that seemed to pulse with a faint, dark energy. The thumping sound was loudest here, a steady, relentless beat that seemed to come from behind the door. The figure approached it cautiously, the pendant in their hand glowing brighter as they neared the source of the sound. The air was thick with tension, a palpable sense of anticipation that made the figure's heart race. The watcher was close, its presence a heavy weight that pressed down on the figure's shoulders. With a deep breath, the figure reached out and placed a hand on the door. The surface was cold to the touch, a biting chill that sent a shiver down their spine. The carvings seemed to writhe beneath their fingers, the dark energy pulsing with a life of its own. The figure hesitated for a moment, the sense of dread almost overwhelming, before pushing the door open with a slow, deliberate motion. The door creaked open with a low groan, revealing a dark, cavernous space beyond. The air inside was thick with the scent of earth and decay, the walls lined with roots that twisted and curled like living things. The floor was covered in a thick layer of dust, the surface undisturbed for centuries. The only light came from the pendant, its glow barely enough to penetrate the darkness that filled the chamber. The thumping sound was louder here, a relentless beat that seemed to come from deep within the earth itself. The figure stepped into the chamber, the floor shifting beneath their feet as they moved further inside. The walls seemed to close in around them, the roots pressing in as if trying to engulf the figure in their grasp. The air was thick with tension, a sense of impending doom that made the figure's heart pound in their chest. At the far end of the chamber, the figure could see the source of the thumping sound, a large, stone altar, its surface slick with something dark and glistening. The altar was covered in strange symbols, the carvings pulsing with a dark energy that seemed to resonate with the rhythm of the thumping sound. The air around the altar was heavy, the darkness almost tangible as it pressed against the figure's skin. The figure approached the altar slowly, their steps cautious as they neared the source of the dark energy. The pendant in their hand pulsed in time with the thumping sound, its glow flickering as if in response to the power that radiated from the altar. The air was thick with the scent of blood and decay, a sickly sweet odor that made the figure's stomach churn. As they reached the altar, the figure could see that the dark, glistening substance that covered its surface was blood, thick, congealed blood that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The carvings on the altar were ancient, the symbols unfamiliar and disturbing, their meaning lost to time. The thumping sound was almost deafening now, a relentless beat that seemed to shake the very foundations of the mansion. The figure reached out and placed a hand on the altar, their fingers brushing against the cold, slick surface. The pendant in their hand flared with light, the glow illuminating the dark chamber and revealing the true nature of the symbols carved into the stone. They were wards, ancient, powerful wards meant to contain something, to keep it trapped within the altar. The realization hit the figure like a blow, the truth of what lay beneath the mansion's foundations. The Watcher was not just a presence in the walls. It was a force, a dark, malevolent entity that had been trapped within the mansion for centuries, its power sealed away by the wards on the altar. But the wards were weakening, the dark energy seeping through the cracks in the stone, and the Watcher was growing stronger with each passing moment. The figure could feel the darkness pressing in on them, the air growing colder as the Watcher's power surged. The pendant in their hand was a lifeline, its light the only thing keeping the darkness at bay. But the figure knew that the pendant's power was limited, that it would not be enough to contain the Watcher for long. With a sense of urgency, the figure began to search the chamber for a way to strengthen the wards, to reinforce the barrier that kept the Watcher trapped. The walls were lined with ancient symbols, the carvings pulsing with a faint light as the figure moved closer. The roots that twisted through the chamber seemed to writhe in response to the figure's presence, as if trying to keep them away from the walls. The figure moved quickly, their hands tracing the symbols on the walls as they searched for a way to restore the wards. The pendant in their hand pulsed with energy, the light growing brighter as the figure focused on the task at hand. The thumping sound was almost unbearable now, a relentless beat that seemed to shake the very foundations of the mansion. Finally, the figure found what they were looking for, a small, hidden alcove in the far corner of the chamber. Inside the alcove was a stone tablet, its surface covered in intricate carvings that glowed faintly in the light of the pendant. The figure reached out and placed a hand on the tablet, their fingers tracing the symbols as they focused on the energy that radiated from the stone. The pendant in their hand flared with light, the glow illuminating the chamber as the figure channeled their energy into the tablet. The symbols on the tablet began to pulse with a bright, golden light, the energy flowing from the stone and into the walls of the chamber. The roots that twisted through the chamber recoiled, their dark forms shrinking away from the light as the power of the wards was restored. The thumping sound began to fade, the relentless beat growing weaker as the Watcher's power was contained once more. The air in the chamber grew warmer, the oppressive chill lifting as the darkness retreated. The figure could feel the weight of the Watcher's presence lifting from their shoulders, the sense of dread that had gripped them easing as the wards were strengthened. But the figure knew that this was only a temporary solution, that the Watcher's power would continue to grow as the wards weakened over time. The mansion was a place of darkness, its walls filled with ancient secrets and malevolent forces that could not be easily banished. The pendant in their hand was a reminder of the dangers that lurked within the mansion, a warning of the darkness that lay hidden beneath its surface. With a final glance around the chamber, the figure turned and began to make their way back through the labyrinth of corridors. The air was still cold, but the oppressive sense of dread had lifted, replaced by a cautious optimism. The pendant's glow was a beacon of hope in the darkness, a symbol of the power that could be used to keep the Watcher at bay. The figure ascended the staircase, their steps echoing off the stone walls as they made their way back to the upper floors. The mansion seemed quieter now, the shadows less menacing as the power of the Watcher was contained. The figure moved quickly, their mind racing as they considered the next steps in their quest to uncover the mansion's secrets. As they reached the main entrance of the mansion, the figure paused for a moment, their gaze drifting back toward the darkened halls of the cellar. The mansion was a place of darkness, its secrets buried deep within its walls. The Watcher was a force of malevolence, but it was not the only danger that lurked within the mansion's confines. With a deep breath, the figure stepped out into the light of the morning sun, the cool air a welcome relief from the oppressive darkness of the mansion. The fog was beginning to lift, the mist swirling away as the sun's rays pierced through the clouds. The mansion stood silent and still, its dark silhouette a stark contrast to the brightness of the day. The figure knew that they would have to return to the mansion, to continue their quest to uncover the darkness that lay hidden within its walls. The Watcher was a powerful force, but it was not the only danger that awaited them. The mansion held many secrets, and each one would need to be uncovered if they were to fully understand the darkness that lurked within. With a final glance at the mansion, the figure turned and walked away, the pendant in their hand a constant reminder of the dangers that lay ahead. The mansion stood silent and still, its secrets waiting to be revealed by the next brave soul who dared to enter its darkened halls. Chapter 7. The Echoes of the Past. The mansion stood in the twilight, its once grand facade now shrouded in the deepening gloom of evening. The figure returned with a renewed sense of urgency, the pendant hanging from their neck a constant reminder of the perils that lay within. The fading light cast long shadows across the entrance, the darkness creeping steadily closer as the sun dipped below the horizon. The air was colder now, a biting chill that seemed to seep into the very walls of the mansion. Inside, the figure moved purposefully through the deserted hallways. The mansion seemed to shift with each step, its creaking floors and groaning walls betraying a restless, malevolent energy. The dim light of the pendant illuminated only a narrow path, leaving the surrounding darkness a tangled mass of uncertainty and foreboding. Every shadow seemed to stretch and writhe, as if alive with the echoes of the mansion's long-forgotten inhabitants. The figure made their way to a room that had remained unexplored, the library. The large wooden doors, heavy and adorned with tarnished brass fittings, groaned on their hinges as they were pushed open. Inside, the room was a vast expanse of dust-covered shelves, each one lined with ancient tomes and manuscripts that had not been disturbed for years. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and mildew, a testament to the library's long neglect. The pendant's light revealed the intricate woodwork of the room, the rich mahogany of the bookshelves, and the grand fireplace at the far end. The fireplace was dark, its hearth cold and empty, but the mantel was cluttered with faded photographs and tarnished knickknacks. The figure approached the mantel, their footsteps echoing softly in the stillness. The photographs were old, their edges yellowed and frayed with age. They depicted scenes of the mansion's past, a family gathered around a dinner table, children playing in the garden, and portraits of solemn faces staring out from gilded frames. The figure studied each photograph closely, noting the expressions and the attire of the people captured in time. There was an unsettling sense of familiarity to them, as if the faces belonged to people who were still very much a part of the mansion's story. Beside the photographs, a dusty ledger lay open on the mantel. Its pages were filled with neat, handwritten entries, detailing the daily affairs and events of the mansion's occupants. The figure traced the faded ink with their fingers, trying to make sense of the scribbled notes. The entries spoke of mundane activities, dinners, visits, and gatherings. But beneath the surface, there was an undercurrent of unease, a sense that something darker lay beneath the surface of these recorded events. The figure turned their attention to the shelves of books lining the walls. The tomes were ancient, their spines cracked and worn from years of disuse. They were bound in leather and adorned with gold leaf, their titles embossed in faded letters. The figure pulled a few volumes from the shelves, their hands brushing against the dust-covered covers. Each book seemed to whisper secrets of the past, their contents a tangled web of history and mystery. One book in particular caught the figure's eye. It was a large, leather-bound volume with a cover that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. The title was obscured by years of grime, but the figure could make out the faint outline of an intricate symbol, one that matched the carvings on the altar in the cellar. With a sense of purpose, the figure opened the book, the pages rustling softly as they turned. Inside, the book was filled with detailed illustrations and diagrams of arcane symbols and rituals. The figure traced the symbols with their fingers, their mind racing as they tried to piece together the information. The book spoke of ancient rites, of dark forces that had been contained and controlled by powerful wards. The symbols and rituals detailed in the book were the same as those found in the cellar, a disturbing connection that tied the past to the present. The figure's attention was drawn to a particular section of the book, a detailed account of a ritual designed to summon and control a dark entity. The ritual required a series of specific components, each one carefully arranged to create a barrier of power strong enough to contain the entity. The figure's heart raced as they read through the instructions, realizing that the ritual described was directly related to the Watcher they had encountered. The book provided a detailed list of the components needed for the ritual: rare herbs, precious stones, and ancient relics. The figure knew that these items would be difficult to find, but they also knew that they were crucial to reinforcing the wards and keeping the Watcher contained. With a sense of determination, the figure closed the book and replaced it on the shelf, their mind already planning the next steps in their quest. As they left the library, the figure's thoughts were consumed by the revelations they had uncovered. The mansion's past was intertwined with the darkness that lingered within its walls, and the history of its inhabitants was a crucial piece of the puzzle. The photographs, the ledger, and the book were all part of a larger story, one that the figure was only beginning to unravel. The mansion seemed even darker now, the shadows stretching and deepening as the night settled in. The figure moved through the corridors with purpose, their steps echoing off the walls as they made their way back to the cellar. The pendant's glow cast long shadows that danced along the stone walls, a visual reminder of the darkness that threatened to break free. In the cellar, the figure paused to gather their thoughts. The chamber with the altar was quiet now, the oppressive presence of the Watcher subdued but not gone. The pendant's light flickered, its glow a constant reminder of the power it held and the danger that still lurked within the mansion's depths. The figure's mind raced with the implications of the book's revelations. The ritual was a powerful tool, but it was also a risk. To perform it correctly, they would need to gather the components listed in the book, each one a rare and valuable item. The search would take time and effort, but it was a necessary step in their quest to contain the darkness. With a final glance around the chamber, the figure turned and ascended the staircase, their thoughts already turning to the task ahead. The mansion held many secrets, and each one was a piece of the puzzle that needed to be uncovered. The past was a guide to the present, and the figure knew that understanding the history of the mansion was crucial to overcoming the darkness that threatened to consume it. The night outside was still and silent, the mansion a dark silhouette against the starry sky. The figure stood at the entrance, the pendant's light casting a faint glow on the ground. They knew that the journey ahead would be challenging, but they were determined to see it through. The mansion's secrets were waiting to be uncovered, and the figure was prepared to face whatever darkness lay ahead. Chapter 8: The Gathering Shadows. The mansion was shrouded in the thick, velvety darkness of night as the figure returned, their mind focused on the task ahead. The pendant's soft glow was a comforting beacon in the oppressive blackness, guiding them through the labyrinthine halls. The mansion seemed different at night, its shadows deeper, its silence more profound. Each creak of the wooden floors and groan of the walls felt magnified, a reminder of the darkness that lurked within. The figure moved deliberately, their footsteps echoing softly in the stillness. The mansion was a place of secrets, each room a potential repository of hidden knowledge. The library had provided a crucial clue, but it was clear that more information was needed. The figure needed to understand the nature of the dark entity and the specifics of the ritual to reinforce the wards. They made their way to a different part of the mansion, the East Wing, a section that had remained unexplored. The air grew colder as they approached, a creeping chill that seemed to emanate from the walls. The figure's breath formed small clouds in the dim light of the pendant as they pushed open a heavy door leading to an old storage room. Inside, the room was a chaotic jumble of old furniture, broken objects, and stacks of dusty boxes. The air was thick with the scent of mold and disuse, the floor covered in a layer of grime. The figure carefully navigated through the clutter, their eyes scanning for anything of interest. The room was a time capsule of the mansion's past, its contents a reflection of years of neglect and decay. Amidst the clutter, the figure discovered an old chest, its surface covered in a thick layer of dust. The chest was bound with iron bands, its lock rusted but intact. The figure knelt beside it and examined the lock closely. It was a simple design, one that could be easily opened with the right tools. With careful, deliberate movements, the figure used a small, hidden tool to pry open the chest. Inside, the chest revealed a collection of old, leather-bound journals and parchment papers. The journals were worn, their covers cracked and faded with age. The figure picked up the first journal and opened it, their eyes scanning the pages for any relevant information. The writing was neat but faded, the ink having bled through the years. The journals detailed the daily life of the mansion's past occupants, much like the ledger found in the library. However, there were entries that hinted at the dark events that had transpired. The writing spoke of strange occurrences, disappearances, unexplained phenomena, and a growing sense of dread among the inhabitants. The entries became increasingly erratic, the tone shifting from mundane observations to frantic accounts of unsettling events. One journal, in particular, caught the figure's attention. It was smaller than the others, its cover decorated with an elaborate symbol, the same one that had appeared on the altar in the cellar. The figure opened the journal carefully, their heart racing as they began to read. The pages were filled with detailed notes on the rituals and symbols associated with the dark entity. The journal described the rituals in intricate detail, including the components required and the steps necessary to perform them correctly. The figure noted the similarities between the descriptions and the information found in the book from the library. The journal's author had clearly been deeply involved in the study of dark forces, their knowledge extensive and unsettling. As the figure read, they realized that the rituals described were not just about containment, but also about summoning and controlling the dark entity. The symbols and incantations were designed to manipulate the entity's power, to bind it to the will of the practitioner. The figure's mind raced with the implications of this information. The Watcher was not merely a passive presence, but an active force that could be influenced and controlled through these rituals. The figure spent hours poring over the journals, their focus unwavering as they absorbed the information. The journals provided crucial insights into the nature of the dark entity, its strengths, and its weaknesses. They also revealed the methods used to keep the entity contained, the rituals that had been performed to maintain the wards and prevent the entity from breaking free. With the journals in hand, the figure turned their attention to the storage room. The chest had revealed more than just written records. It contained various items related to the rituals: incense burners, ceremonial knives, and small vials of strange substances. These items were essential components of the rituals described in the journals, and their presence suggested that the chest had once been used for ritualistic purposes. The figure carefully examined each item, their mind cataloging the potential uses and relevance to their quest. The incense burners were used to create a specific atmosphere during rituals, the knives for precise cuts and offerings, and the vials for mixing essential substances. Each item was a piece of the puzzle, a tool that would be necessary for performing the rituals described in the journals. As dawn approached, the figure knew that their time in the storage room was coming to an end. The mansion was silent, the only sound the faint rustling of pages and the soft thud of objects being moved. The figure gathered the journals and items carefully, making sure not to leave anything behind. The knowledge and tools they had found were crucial to their mission, and they needed to be preserved and protected. With the chest packed and secured, the figure made their way back through the mansion, their minds still processing the information they had uncovered. The mansion seemed even more enigmatic now, its dark corners and shadowy hallways taking on a new significance. The shadows seemed to gather around them, a reflection of the knowledge they had gained and the dangers that lay ahead. The figure ascended the staircase to the main floor, the pendant's light casting long shadows that danced along the walls. The mansion's silence was a stark contrast to the bustling life it once knew, the echoes of the past lingering in every corner. The figure felt a growing sense of urgency as they realized the enormity of their task. The Watcher was a powerful and malevolent force, and the rituals needed to control it required careful planning and precise execution. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows, the figure stepped outside, the cool morning air a welcome relief from the oppressive atmosphere of the mansion. The pendant's glow faded as the sun's rays took over, the light revealing the mansion's true, weathered state. The figure knew that their quest was far from over. The mansion held many secrets, and each revelation brought them closer to understanding the darkness that lay within. With a final glance at the mansion, the figure turned and walked away, their thoughts focused on the next steps in their journey. The knowledge and tools they had gathered would be crucial in their quest to contain and control the dark entity. The mansion stood silent behind them, its secrets waiting to be fully uncovered by the next brave soul who dared to face its shadows. Chapter 9. The Unraveling Mystery. The mansion loomed in the early morning light, its dark silhouette a stark contrast against the clear blue sky. The figure approached with renewed determination, their mind focused on the next steps in their quest. The knowledge and artifacts gathered from the storage room were valuable, but they needed to be put to use. The mansion was still full of mysteries, and it was clear that the dark entity's presence was more complex than anticipated. Returning to the mansion, the figure navigated through the familiar labyrinth of corridors. The pendant's glow illuminated their path, casting an eerie light on the walls. The silence was more pronounced now, each step echoing through the empty halls. The mansion seemed to hold its breath, as if aware of the figure's return. The figure made their way back to the library, where the earlier discoveries had provided crucial insights. The library's vast collection of books and manuscripts held the promise of more information. The figure intended to delve deeper into the library's contents, seeking further understanding of the dark entity and the rituals associated with it. Inside the library, the figure meticulously examined the remaining volumes on the shelves. Each book was a potential source of knowledge, and the figure was determined to leave no stone unturned. They began by carefully selecting and opening books that seemed related to occult practices and ancient rites. The musty scent of old paper and the rustling of pages filled the air as they worked. Among the many books, one in particular stood out, a large, ornately decorated volume bound in dark red leather. The cover was embossed with intricate symbols, and its spine was adorned with gold leaf. The book seemed to emanate an aura of significance, and the figure opened it with a sense of reverence. The book contained detailed illustrations and explanations of various symbols and rituals, many of which were related to summoning and controlling dark forces. The pages were filled with elaborate diagrams, each one meticulously drawn to represent the complex interactions between symbols and the energies they controlled. The figure carefully studied each diagram, their mind racing with the implications of the information. As they turned the pages, the figure came across a section that detailed a specific ritual, one designed to strengthen the wards and barriers against dark entities. The ritual involved creating a protective circle, inscribing powerful symbols, and performing a series of precise movements and offerings. The figure noted the similarities between this ritual and the ones described in the journals found in the storage room. The book also contained detailed descriptions of the various components needed for the ritual. The ingredients were familiar: rare herbs, precious stones, and ancient relics. The figure made a mental list of the items they needed to gather, their thoughts focused on the task ahead. The ritual was complex and required careful preparation, but it was crucial for reinforcing the wards and keeping the dark entity contained. With the information from the book in hand, the figure turned their attention to another part of the library, a section dedicated to maps and blueprints of the mansion. The maps provided a detailed layout of the mansion's various floors and rooms, including areas that had not yet been explored. The figure spread the maps out on a large table and studied them closely. The maps revealed hidden passages and secret rooms, areas that were not immediately visible to the casual observer. The figure traced the lines on the maps, noting the locations of the hidden spaces and their potential relevance to the quest. The hidden passages could hold additional clues or artifacts, and the figure knew that exploring these areas would be essential to uncovering the mansion's full story. Armed with the knowledge from the maps, the figure decided to investigate one of the hidden passages. They located the entrance, concealed behind a large, ornate tapestry in the library. With careful effort, the figure moved the tapestry aside and revealed a hidden door. The door was old and heavy, but it opened with a creak, revealing a narrow passage leading deeper into the mansion. The passage was dark and narrow, the walls lined with cobwebs and dust. The figure moved cautiously, their footsteps echoing softly in the confined space. The pendant's glow illuminated only a small portion of the passage, casting long shadows that danced along the walls. The air was stale and musty, carrying the scent of long-forgotten secrets. After a short walk, the passage opened into a small, hidden chamber. The chamber was filled with old furniture, broken and covered in dust. A large wooden chest sat in the center of the room, its surface intricately carved with the same symbols that appeared in the book and journals. The chest seemed to exude an air of importance, and the figure approached it with a sense of anticipation. The chest was locked, but the figure had come prepared. They used a small, hidden tool to carefully unlock it, the mechanism clicking open with a satisfying sound. Inside, the chest contained a collection of old relics and artifacts, each one carefully wrapped in layers of cloth. The items were a mix of ceremonial objects and ancient relics, their significance evident from their craftsmanship and design. The figure carefully unwrapped each item, their eyes widening as they recognized some of the symbols and components described in the books. The relics included ceremonial knives, incense burners, and small vials of strange substances. Each item was a piece of the puzzle, a tool that would be necessary for performing the rituals and reinforcing the wards. Among the relics was a small, ornate box, its surface inlaid with intricate designs. The figure opened the box and found a collection of gemstones, each one cut and polished to a high degree. The gemstones were the same ones mentioned in the ritual descriptions, their presence a crucial element in the protective rituals. With the artifacts and relics gathered, the figure felt a growing sense of accomplishment. The hidden chamber had provided valuable resources, and the knowledge from the books and maps had shed light on the mansion's secrets. The figure knew that the next step was to prepare for the ritual, gathering the remaining components and performing the necessary preparations. As the figure left the hidden chamber and retraced their steps through the passage, their thoughts were filled with a mix of anticipation and trepidation. The ritual was a crucial part of their quest, and its success would determine the effectiveness of the wards in containing the dark entity. The figure was determined to see it through, to face the darkness and protect the mansion from the malevolent force that lurked within. Back in the library, the figure carefully organized the artifacts and relics, their mind already planning the steps for the upcoming ritual. The mansion was a place of shadows and secrets, but with each discovery, the figure felt closer to understanding the full extent of its darkness. The ritual was a significant challenge, but it was also an opportunity to gain control over the malevolent force that threatened to break free. The figure's resolve was unwavering, as they prepared for the next phase of their quest. The mansion stood silent and still, its dark corners and hidden passages waiting to be explored. The figure knew that the journey ahead would be fraught with challenges, but they were prepared to face whatever darkness lay ahead. The mansion's secrets were waiting to be uncovered, and the figure was determined to unravel the mystery and confront the shadows that lurked within. Chapter 10: The Ritual of Binding. The mansion was silent in the early hours of the morning, its darkened rooms shrouded in a heavy stillness. The figures stood in the library, their preparations for the ritual laid out with meticulous care. The artifacts and relics collected from the hidden chamber were arranged on a large table, each item carefully positioned according to the diagrams and descriptions found in the ancient texts. The air was filled with an intense focus, the figure's movements precise and deliberate. The pendant's light cast an ethereal glow across the room, illuminating the intricate symbols and diagrams that had been sketched out on parchment. The library, once a place of dusty old books and forgotten knowledge, had been transformed into a ritual space, a place where the boundaries between the mundane and the arcane would be tested. The first step was to create the protective circle. The figure spread out a large sheet of parchment on the floor, its surface covered with intricate symbols and diagrams. Using a special ink, the figure began to draw the circle, carefully inscribing each symbol with steady, practiced hands. The symbols were a mix of ancient runes and mystical signs, their meanings deeply rooted in the lore of protection and binding. As the circle took shape, the figure worked with a sense of purpose. The protective circle was not just a physical barrier, but a mystical one, designed to create a space where the ritual could be performed safely and effectively. The symbols were drawn with precision, their lines clean and clear. The process was painstaking, but the figure knew that every detail mattered. With the circle complete, the figure began to prepare the ceremonial altar. The altar was a large, ornate table that had been cleaned and set up in the center of the circle. On it, the figure placed the ceremonial knives, incense burners, and small vials of strange substances. Each item was positioned according to the instructions in the texts, their arrangement essential for the success of the ritual. The gemstones collected from the hidden chest were also placed on the altar, their vibrant colors reflecting the pendant's light. The figure carefully arranged the gemstones in a specific pattern, their placement crucial for the ritual's effectiveness. The gems were not just decorative. They were powerful components that would aid in the binding process. Next, the figure prepared the incense burners. They filled each burner with a mixture of rare herbs and resins, their aromas filling the room with a heady fragrance. The incense was intended to create a specific atmosphere, one that would enhance the ritual's power and facilitate the connection with the spiritual realms. The figure lit the incense, the smoke curling and drifting through the air. The room was soon filled with a thick haze, the scent of the burning herbs creating an otherworldly atmosphere. The pendant's light flickered and danced in the smoke, casting shifting shadows that added to the ritual's eerie ambience. With everything in place, the figure took a deep breath and began the ritual. They moved with practiced grace, their actions precise and deliberate. The ritual was complex, requiring a series of specific movements and gestures. The figure followed the instructions meticulously, their focus unwavering as they performed each step. The first part of the ritual involved invoking the protective energies. The figure raised their hands and traced symbols in the air, their movements fluid and deliberate. As they chanted the silent incantations, the symbols glowed with a faint, ethereal light. The protective circle seemed to hum with energy, its power growing as the figure continued the ritual. The next step was to reinforce the wards. The figure took the ceremonial knives and used them to make precise cuts in the air, tracing out additional symbols and lines. The knives were sharp and gleaming, their edges catching the light as they moved. Each cut was made with care, the symbols taking on a vibrant, glowing quality as they were etched into the space. The gemstones on the altar were then activated. The figure picked up each gem and held it above the altar, focusing their intent and energy on the stone. The gems began to emit a soft, pulsating light, their colors shifting and blending in response to the figure's actions. The light intensified as the figure completed the activation, the gemstone's energy merging with the protective circle. The final part of the ritual was the binding process. The figure took a vial of strange substance and poured it into a small bowl on the altar. The liquid was dark and thick, its texture resembling molasses. The figure used a ceremonial brush to spread the substance in a specific pattern on the parchment circle, their movements precise and measured. As the binding substance was applied, the symbols on the parchment began to glow with a bright, intense light. The figure could feel the power of the ritual growing, a palpable energy that seemed to resonate through the room. The air was charged with a sense of anticipation, the protective circle now fully activated and empowered. With the ritual complete, the figure took a moment to assess their work. The room was filled with the soft glow of the symbols, the incense smoke drifting lazily through the air. The protective circle was a shimmering barrier of light, its power a testament to the success of the ritual. The figure carefully cleaned up the altar and the surrounding area, their movements deliberate and methodical. The ceremonial knives and incense burners were returned to their places, the gemstones carefully wrapped and stored. The room, once a place of preparation, was now a space imbued with the energy of the ritual. As the figure stood in the library, their thoughts were filled with a mix of relief and apprehension. The ritual had been a crucial step in their quest, a necessary measure to reinforce the wards and contain the dark entity. The mansion seemed to respond to the ritual, its shadows shifting and the air growing still. The figure knew that the ritual was only one part of the larger challenge. The dark entity was still a threat, and there were many more steps to take before the mansion could be considered safe. The knowledge and artifacts gathered had been invaluable, but the true test lay ahead. With the ritual complete, the figure prepared to leave the library. The mansion was still and silent. The only sound the faint rustling of the pendant's light and the soft whisper of the incense smoke. The figure stepped out of the library and into the dimly lit hallway, their mind focused on the next phase of their journey. The mansion's secrets were far from fully uncovered, and the darkness that lurked within was still a formidable challenge. The figure's resolve was steadfast as they prepared for the next steps in their quest. The ritual had strengthened the wards, but there was still much to be done to fully understand and control the malevolent force that threatened the mansion. With each passing moment, the figure felt a growing sense of determination. The mansion's mysteries were slowly unraveling, and with each discovery, they were one step closer to confronting the darkness. The journey was far from over, but the figure was prepared to face whatever lay ahead, guided by the knowledge and strength gained from the ritual. Chapter 11. Echoes of the Past. The mansion stood silent and brooding, its shadowed halls resonating with an eerie calm. The figure had completed the ritual, reinforcing the protective wards and setting the stage for the next phase of their quest. With each passing day, the mansion seemed to reveal more of its hidden past, and the figure felt a growing sense of urgency. The dark entity was still a looming threat, and there were more secrets to uncover. The figure's next task was to explore the mansion's hidden rooms and passages, many of which had been revealed by the maps found in the library. Armed with a lantern and the pendant's dim glow, the figure ventured into the uncharted parts of the mansion, their footsteps echoing softly in the stillness. The first hidden passage led to an old, dusty hallway. The walls were lined with faded wallpaper and cobwebs, and the air was thick with the scent of mold and decay. The figure moved cautiously, their lantern casting flickering shadows that danced along the walls. The passage opened into a small room filled with old furniture, its surfaces covered in a thick layer of dust. In the center of the room stood an ornate grandfather clock, its pendulum still and its hands frozen in time. The clock was an imposing presence, its dark wood and intricate carvings a testament to its age. The figure approached the clock, their curiosity piqued. It seemed out of place in the otherwise neglected room, its pristine condition a stark contrast to the surrounding decay. Upon closer inspection, the figure noticed a small, hidden compartment in the base of the clock. With careful effort, they pried open the compartment and found a collection of old letters and photographs. The letters were yellowed with age, their ink faded but still legible. The photographs were black and white, depicting scenes of the mansion and its inhabitants from a bygone era. The figure sifted through the letters and photographs, their mind piecing together fragments of the mansion's history. The letters were personal correspondences between the mansion's past residents, revealing glimpses into their lives and relationships. The photographs depicted various events and gatherings, showing a once vibrant and bustling home. One photograph in particular caught the figure's attention. It showed a group of people standing in front of the mansion, their expressions solemn and their attire formal. Among them was a man who resembled the figure in the portrait found in the library. The resemblance was striking, suggesting a familial connection. The letters mentioned a series of events that had transpired in the mansion, including strange occurrences and unexplained phenomena. The correspondences spoke of a growing sense of unease among the residents, their once happy home becoming a place of fear and foreboding. The letters hinted at a dark presence that had begun to plague the mansion, its influence growing stronger over time. As the figure read through the letters, they discovered references to a secret society or group that had been involved in the mansion's dark history. The correspondences mentioned rituals and ceremonies performed in the mansion, suggesting that the dark entity was not a recent phenomenon, but rather a long-standing presence. The figure gathered the letters and photographs, their thoughts consumed by the revelations. The mansion's past was more complex and unsettling than they had imagined, and the dark entity's influence seemed to be deeply rooted in the history of the house. The information provided by the letters and photographs was crucial for understanding the full extent of the entity's power and the mansion's secrets. Leaving the small room behind, the figure continued their exploration of the mansion. The hidden passages and rooms were a maze of forgotten history, each one revealing more about the mansion's past. The figure's lantern light illuminated the dusty surfaces and cobweb-covered corners, casting a ghostly glow on the abandoned spaces. The next hidden room was a small study, its furnishings covered in dust and its shelves lined with old books. The room was filled with an air of faded elegance, its once stately decor now a reflection of years of neglect. The figure carefully examined the room, their eyes scanning for any additional clues or artifacts. On a dusty desk, the figure found a leather-bound journal, its cover cracked and worn. The journal was similar to the ones found in the storage room, but it appeared to be more personal. The entries were handwritten in a neat, flowing script, revealing the thoughts and observations of the journal's author. The journal detailed the author's experiences and observations of the strange occurrences in the mansion. The entries described eerie noises, unsettling visions, and a growing sense of dread. The author's writing grew increasingly frantic, their fear and desperation evident in the pages. The journal provided a first-hand account of the dark entity's influence and the impact it had on the mansion's residents. As the figure read through the journal, They came across a passage that described a specific ritual, one performed to summon and control the dark entity. The ritual was similar to the ones found in the earlier texts, but it included additional details and variations. The passage mentioned the use of a particular artifact, a ceremonial dagger with an ornate handle. The figure's thoughts raced as they realized the significance of the artifact mentioned in the journal. The dagger could be a key component in the rituals, and its absence could be a crucial factor in the effectiveness of the binding process. The figure resolved to search for the artifact, knowing that it could be hidden in one of the mansion's many concealed spaces. With renewed determination, the figure continued their exploration, moving through the mansion's darkened corridors and hidden rooms. The search for the ceremonial dagger took them to the mansion's attic, a dusty, cluttered space filled with old trunks and forgotten belongings. The attic was a treasure trove of old items, each one a piece of the mansion's history. The figure sifted through the clutter, their hands brushing against old clothes, broken furniture, and forgotten trinkets. The search was arduous, but the figure was determined to find the artifact. After hours of searching, the figure finally came across a small, ornate box buried beneath a pile of old linens. The box was intricately carved, its surface adorned with the same symbols that had appeared in the journal. The figure carefully opened the box, revealing its contents. Inside the box lay the ceremonial dagger, its handle adorned with elaborate designs and precious stones. The dagger was in excellent condition, its blade sharp and gleaming. The figure examined the artifact with a sense of satisfaction, knowing that it would be a crucial component in the upcoming rituals. With the dagger in hand, the figure prepared to return to the library. The mansion's secrets were slowly unraveling, and each discovery brought them closer to understanding the dark entity's true nature. The exploration had provided valuable insights and artifacts, and the figure felt a growing sense of purpose. As they made their way back through the mansion, the figure reflected on the revelations of the past. The mansion was a place of shadows and secrets, its history intertwined with the dark entity that lurked within. The letters, photographs, and journals had painted a picture of a once thriving home, now plagued by a malevolent force. The figure knew that the journey was far from over. The knowledge gained from the exploration would be crucial for the next steps in their quest. The dark entity's influence was pervasive, and the mansion's history was a testament to its power. The figure's resolve was unwavering as they prepared to confront the darkness and protect the mansion from the malevolent force that threatened to break free. As the figure reached the library, the pendant's light illuminated their path, casting a soft glow on the dusty surfaces. The mansion stood silent and still, its shadows waiting to be explored. The figure's thoughts were focused on the next phase of their journey, guided by the knowledge and artifacts uncovered during their exploration. The mansion's mysteries were far from fully uncovered, and the darkness that lurked within was still a formidable challenge. The figure was prepared to face whatever lay ahead, guided by the insights gained from the past and the strength of their resolve. The journey continued, and the mansion's secrets awaited their discovery. Chapter 12: The Descent into Darkness. The mansion lay shrouded in an oppressive silence as the figure prepared for the next phase of their investigation. The knowledge gathered from the hidden rooms and ancient texts had provided valuable insights, but there was still much to uncover. The dark entity's presence continued to loom over the mansion, its influence pervasive and unsettling. The figure's focus shifted to a hidden staircase discovered in the mansion's basement. The staircase was concealed behind a false wall, its entrance revealed only through the meticulous exploration of the mansion's many secrets. The figure descended the stairs, their lantern casting a dim light that illuminated the narrow, stone-lined passage. The air grew colder and denser as the figure made their way down, each step echoing softly in the stillness. The walls of the passage were rough and uneven, their surfaces covered in ancient carvings and faded inscriptions. The carvings depicted scenes of ritualistic ceremonies and symbolic imagery, their meanings shrouded in mystery. At the base of the staircase, the passage opened into a vast, subterranean chamber. The chamber was vast and cavernous, its walls lined with shelves and alcoves filled with dusty relics and forgotten artifacts. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and mildew, the atmosphere thick with the weight of centuries. The figure carefully examined the chamber, their lanterns light, revealing the intricate details of the artifacts and the inscriptions on the walls. The chamber was a repository of ancient knowledge, its shelves lined with old tomes, scrolls, and ceremonial objects. The artifacts were arranged in a haphazard manner, their significance unclear, but their presence undeniable. Among the relics, the figure discovered an old, weathered book bound in dark leather. The book's cover was adorned with intricate symbols and runes, its pages yellowed and brittle with age. The figure carefully opened the book, their eyes scanning the faded text and illustrations. The book was a compendium of dark rituals and arcane knowledge, its contents detailing the methods used to summon and control malevolent entities. The rituals described were complex and dangerous, requiring precise preparations and specific artifacts. The book provided a detailed account of the ritual's procedures, their purpose, and their consequences. The figure's attention was drawn to a particular ritual described in the book, a ritual designed to strengthen the bonds between the physical and spiritual realms. The ritual involved the use of a special artifact, a crystal orb said to enhance the summoning and control of dark entities. The orb was mentioned in the book as a crucial component for the ritual's success. The figure's mind raced with the implications of the discovery. The crystal orb could be the key to understanding and confronting the dark entity that plagued the mansion. The absence of the orb from the earlier discoveries was a significant oversight, and finding it became a new priority. With renewed determination, the figure began to search the chamber for the elusive orb. They meticulously examined each shelf and alcove, their movements deliberate and methodical. The chamber was filled with a maze of artifacts and relics, each one potentially holding the key to the orb's location. Hours passed as the figures scoured the chamber, their lantern casting shifting shadows on the walls. The search was exhaustive, but the figure remained focused, their resolve unwavering. The orb was a critical component in the upcoming rituals, and its recovery was essential for the success of their quest. At last, the figure's efforts paid off. In a hidden alcove, partially obscured by a thick layer of dust, the figure discovered a small, ornate box. The box was intricately carved, its surface adorned with the same symbols that had appeared in the book. The figure carefully opened the box, revealing its contents. Inside the box lay the crystal orb, its surface smooth and translucent. The orb emitted a faint, iridescent glow, its colors shifting and swirling in the dim light. The figure examined the orb with a mixture of awe and relief, recognizing its significance as a powerful tool for the ritual. With the crystal orb in hand, the figure prepared to leave the subterranean chamber. The discovery was a crucial step in the quest to confront the dark entity, and the orb's presence would play a vital role in the upcoming rituals. The figure's thoughts were filled with a sense of anticipation and determination as they ascended the hidden staircase and returned to the mansion's main levels. The mansion's atmosphere was dense and heavy, its silence a constant reminder of the dark entity's influence. The figure's journey through the mansion had revealed many secrets, but there was still much to be done. The rituals and artifacts were pieces of a larger puzzle, each one contributing to the effort to contain and control the malevolent force. The figure returned to the library, their mind focused on the next steps in the quest. The rituals and preparations would require careful planning and execution, and the orb's role was central to the process. The library, once a place of dusty old books and forgotten knowledge, had become a command center for the figure's efforts. The figure carefully placed the crystal orb on the table, its glow casting a soft light across the room. The orb's presence was both reassuring and foreboding, a reminder of the challenges that lay ahead. The figure reviewed the texts and diagrams, their thoughts centered on the upcoming rituals and the steps required to prepare for them. The mansion was still and silent, its shadows waiting to be explored. The figure's resolve was steadfast as they prepared for the next phase of their journey. The dark entity's presence remained a formidable challenge, and the upcoming rituals would test the figure's knowledge and strength. As the figure worked through the preparations, their mind was focused on the task at hand. The rituals would require precision and care, and the crystal orb would be a crucial component in the process. The figure was determined to succeed, guided by the knowledge and artifacts uncovered during the exploration. The mansion's secrets were far from fully uncovered, and the darkness that lurked within was still a significant threat. The figure's journey was far from over, and the upcoming rituals would be a test of their resolve and expertise. The path ahead was fraught with challenges, but the figure was prepared to face whatever lay in store. The library, once a place of quiet contemplation, had become a hub of activity and focus. The figure's thoughts were filled with a mix of anticipation and apprehension as they prepared for the next phase of the quest. The dark entity's influence was pervasive, and the journey to confront it was only beginning. With the crystal orb and the knowledge gained from the exploration, the figure was ready to take the next steps in their journey. The mansion's mysteries awaited their discovery, and the path ahead was both challenging and uncertain. The figure's resolve was unwavering as they prepared to confront the darkness and protect the mansion from the malevolent force that threatened to break free. Chapter 13. The Final Confrontation. The mansion's oppressive silence was a constant reminder of the dark entity that loomed within. The figure had spent days preparing for this moment, meticulously arranging the artifacts and setting the stage for the final confrontation. The crystal orb, the ceremonial dagger, and the ancient texts were all in place, their significance crucial for the upcoming ritual. The library, now a central command post for the figure's efforts, was filled with a sense of purpose and urgency. The once dusty and neglected space had been transformed into a site of intense focus and preparation. The figure reviewed the ritual procedures one last time, ensuring that every detail was in order. As twilight descended, the mansion's atmosphere grew heavier, its silence punctuated by the occasional creak of the old wooden floors. The figure's preparations were complete, and the time had come to confront the darkness that had plagued the mansion for so long. The ritual would be the final test, requiring precise execution and unwavering resolve. The figure moved through the mansion, their path illuminated by the soft glow of the crystal orb and the lantern's light. The corridors were dimly lit, the shadows casting eerie shapes on the walls. Each step was deliberate, the figure's mind focused on the task ahead. The ritual was to take place in the cavernous subterranean chamber, a location chosen for its isolation and its connection to the mansion's dark history. The figure descended the hidden staircase once more, the steps echoing softly in the stillness. The air grew colder and denser as they approached the chamber, a palpable sense of anticipation hanging in the air. Entering the chamber, the figure set up the ritual space with meticulous care. The ceremonial dagger was placed on an ornate pedestal, its blade gleaming in the dim light. The crystal orb was positioned in the center of the ritual circle, its glow casting shifting patterns on the stone floor. The ancient texts were arranged around the circle, their pages open to the relevant sections. The figure began the ritual, their movements precise and methodical. The ancient texts provided guidance for each step, the symbols and incantations necessary for the ceremony. The ritual involved a series of complex gestures and movements, each one intended to bind and contain the dark entity's influence. As the figure performed the ritual, the chamber's atmosphere grew increasingly charged. The air seemed to crackle with energy, the shadows on the walls shifting and swirling. The figure's focus was unwavering, their concentration absolute as they followed the ritual's procedures. The crystal orb's glow intensified, its colors shifting to a deep, pulsating hue. The ceremonial dagger was wielded with practiced precision, its blade cutting through the air as part of the ritual's choreography. The ancient texts guided the figure through the process, their contents essential for the ritual's success. The dark entity's presence was palpable, its influence manifesting as a swirling mass of shadow and energy. The figure could feel the entity's resistance, its malevolent force pushing against the ritual's restraints. The confrontation was intense, the figure's resolve and strength tested to their limits. Despite the entity's resistance, the ritual progressed according to plan. The figure's movements were fluid and controlled, their focus unyielding as they worked to contain the dark force. The energy in the chamber was chaotic, but the figure's determination provided a steady anchor. As the ritual reached its climax, the crystal orb's glow became blinding, its light filling the chamber with a brilliant radiance. The ceremonial dagger was raised high, its blade catching the light and reflecting it in dazzling patterns. The ancient texts pulsed with energy, their words coming to life as the ritual's power surged. The dark entity's resistance waned, its form becoming less distinct and more diffuse. The entity's influence was being drawn into the crystal orb, its malevolent force being contained and subdued. The figure's resolve was unwavering, their concentration absolute as they completed the final steps of the ritual. With a final, decisive gesture, the figure sealed the ritual's energy, the crystal orb's glow fading to a gentle luminescence. The chamber's atmosphere shifted, the oppressive weight of the dark entity's presence lifting. The figure felt a sense of relief and accomplishment, their efforts having succeeded in confronting and containing the darkness. The chamber, once filled with chaos and energy, was now calm and serene. The figure's breathing was steady, their movements slow and deliberate as they gathered the ritual's components. The ceremonial dagger was carefully cleaned and placed back in its storage, the crystal orb's glow now soft and gentle. The figure reflected on the journey, the mansion's secrets and the dark entity's influence now part of a resolved past. The confrontation had been intense, but the outcome was a testament to the figure's determination and expertise. The mansion's atmosphere had changed, its silence now a peaceful echo of the ritual's success. With the ritual complete, the figure made their way back through the mansion. The corridors were still and quiet, the shadows now less foreboding. The figure's steps were measured and deliberate, their thoughts focused on the future and the path ahead. The mansion had been a place of darkness and mystery, but the figure's efforts had brought about a resolution. The secrets and artifacts that had been uncovered were now part of a completed journey, their significance integral to the success of the ritual. As the figure reached the library, they took a moment to appreciate the transformation of the mansion. The once oppressive atmosphere had lifted, the silence now a reflection of the completed task. The figure's resolve had been tested, but the outcome was a testament to their strength and determination. The journey through the mansion had been challenging, but it had also been enlightening. The dark entity's influence had been confronted and contained, and the mansion's secrets had been revealed. The figure's efforts had brought about a sense of closure, their quest now complete. With a final glance at the library, the figure prepared to leave the mansion behind. The journey had been arduous, but it had also been a testament to the power of resolve and the strength of the human spirit. The mansion's mysteries had been uncovered, and the darkness had been confronted. The figure left the mansion with a sense of accomplishment and peace. The journey had been transformative, and the outcome had been successful. The mansion, now free from the dark entity's influence, stood as a testament to the figure's determination and expertise. The final chapter of the journey had been written, and the mansion's story had reached its conclusion. The figure's efforts had brought about a resolution, their quest now complete. The darkness had been confronted, and the mansion's secrets had been laid to rest.